Well, according to my clock, it looks like it's 12 o'clock Eastern, so I'm going to go ahead and get started today. First of all, welcome everyone to the Florida Connecting to Collections webinar, which is found in Collections Abandoned Property. Before we begin, I am going to do a little bit of housekeeping. To start off, everyone right now is muted. That's just basically to make sure that we don't have any interference or any other issues with the sound quality. If for some reason the sound goes out on my end, of course, as we know from these webinars, sometimes there's a slight delay or something, but if there's any major technical issues, please just let me know via the chat box. Questions will be taken at the end of the webinar, just so there's a true question and answer period. But if you have any questions in the meanwhile, please do feel free to type in the chat box. And we will be recording this webinar. So the recording is going to be available on the Florida Connecting to Collections YouTube channel. That channel can be found just by going to YouTube, typing in Florida Association of Museums, and there you will find all sorts of fun information on the program that we run down here in Florida, which I'm actually going to go over right now a little bit. Also, as a final heads up, the webinar will be about 20 to 25 minutes long with that Q&A period afterwards. I'm going to start by introducing our team that actually does Florida Connecting to Collections. I'm speaking right now. My name is Robin Bauer-Kilgo. I'm the Special Projects Manager for FAM, and I'll be running the webinar today. Our Executive Director is Melinda Horton, and we have a project associate on this project as well. Her name is Laura Nemmers. On this slide, you will see all of our email addresses, so if you have any questions about the project or anything else that's happening in Florida, please do not hesitate to contact any of us. This program is the Florida Connecting to Collections program is actually a partnership. We are a partnership between all these fabulous groups. Obviously, there's us in the middle there, Florida Association of Museums. We also have the Society of Florida Archivists, the Florida Department of State, Florida Public Archaeology Network, the State Emergency Response Team, FASA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums down here, the Florida Libraries, and the Florida Art Museum Directors. And this is funded by an IMLS grant. So again, this is a great collaborative project we've been doing down here for the past couple years. And what that project really is helping institutions across the state develop emergency plans and develop collections policies. We've been doing it for about 4 or 5 years now. We just wrapped up over the summer our emergency plans program, which you can find here on this fabulous website. The website is actually located down at the bottom. It's flamuseums.org, Professional Development, Florida Connecting to Collections Emergency Plans. On our website, you'll be able to see basically the sources you might be able to use to actually create an emergency plan. There's 8 modules separated into kind of the big topics you often see in emergency plans. Our webinars, which again have all been posted on YouTube, activities, discussion questions, samples, and online resources. Through the program that actually spanned 2015, we had 77 participants across the state actually do their program. We split our group into mentors and mentees, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And as you can see, we have an interesting time down here in Florida just because our state is so big. We run all the way from down in the Florida Keys, which is actually where I live, all the way up to the Panhandle, up in Pensacola. I think that what we often hear is that the same amount of distance it takes to get from Key West to Pensacola is what it would take to get from Chicago to Pensacola. So because of that, we've really made our Connecting to Collections program something that can be done on a self-paced area or way, and also we set up regional networks to help people just because of the width and breadth of our state. During the actual program, which this is part of it, this little webinar we're doing, we actually have 2 physical workshops. Workshop 1 is usually held at an experienced or mentor organization, and that content has an emphasis on webinars and in-person discussion groups. Workshop 2 is held at mentee organizations, where we do an assessment or a walk around of the organization and a practical activity, which is kind of based upon maybe the subjects that we covered. The interesting thing about these workshops is that we've been doing them now, like I said, for quite a few years, and it seems like this schematic works really well, where we do common webinars, and then we also have discussion groups at the same time. As I said earlier, this guy, the webinar we're doing today, is a little bit of an offshoot. We decided we wanted to go in depth on a certain project or part of our collection management policies, which is the project we're working on today. And when it came up to a vote amongst the current participants we decided that abandoned property and found in loans was the topics we wanted to cover. Continuing the process here during the actual program we have in Florida, mentees write policies with the advice from mentors. As I said, we have 4 modules in total. Mentees have homework before and between the workshops, and mentors are asked to touch base with mentees between the workshop. And we actually have an entire online community that we use. This right now is kind of a private community amongst current participants, but this gives you an idea of how it works. It's actually been pretty interesting to work through it because, again, because of the scope of our state, it's really nice to have an online platform that we can all refer to if we have questions or comments that's protected as well. And again, just a quick plug, this is our schedule for 2017. The 2015 program, as I said previously, was emergency plans. Now we're working on collection management policies / collection development policies, which is something you'll often hear it referred to, the same kind of document in the library world. We are almost ready to close out Module 1. We're doing the webinar today, and then we have a workshop next week. We'll be doing the assessment and the practical exercise. Our next module is actually going to start February 24th, so we'll be starting to recruit new participants beginning late January, early February. That module is going to be based upon loans, documentation, risk management, and insurance. Module 3 is happening May-June timeframe, access and use, collections, care, and intellectual property. And then Module 4 is basically wrapping up the project and putting your topic together, putting your document together, excuse me. One thing about this program, we are unfortunately only open to Florida institutions right now. So if you are a Florida institution and you're interested in participating, please feel free to contact me. My email was on an earlier slide. It'll be later. Again, open enrollment is going to start at the end of the month. It's a free program. We accept museums, library, archives, any kind of collecting institutions. We have some zoos participating, so it's a great program. And for those of you, which I think we do have quite a few people who are not in Florida, again, we have the website, which is where when we finish out our program, we package everything together and put it on the website for public consumption. And also, if you just have questions on how we run it, feel free to email me. Again, my email is robin@flamuseums.org. So we finished the plugging of my program, which is always an important thing. I'm going to right up front say the sources for this actual webinar for founding collections and abandoned property are 2 of the best sources I know of on this topic. One is John E. Simmons' Things Great and Small, Collections Management Policies. I believe Mr. Simmons is working on a new document soon, or a new book, but this is kind of my Bible whenever I work on my collections management policies. And as for the topic of founding collections and even abandoned property, there's this great website. It's called www.foundingcollections.com. From what I'm understanding, it actually came from an AAM session that happened a couple of years ago. It's wonderful, and I borrowed heavily from it. So if you're interested in kind of deep diving more on the subject, I would definitely recommend to go to this website itself. Okay, so the best place to start with this topic, or any of these topics, are really definitions. What are abandoned collections / orphan collections? You hear them called that. And what is a founded collection? Well, for abandoned collections, they are objects that have been abandoned by their owner or have lost curatorial support. So theoretically, it's an object in your collection that you just have it and you're not quite sure where the legal title or the ownership actually lies. For found in collection, this type of object is an undocumented object found in your collection. So basically, I like to think of it as you've opened up your collection storage and there's a thing that you have. You don't have any information for it. You don't know where it came from. It's pretty much just a floating object out there. How does this happen? Oftentimes for abandoned collections or orphan collections, a person in charge of the care retires or quits and is not replaced. So again, abandoned collections are maybe something that you have some information on, or maybe was, as my second bullet point says, an old loan that wasn't returned or processed properly. So sometimes with those, you have an inkling of information on maybe who owned it. It's just you have no way to contact the people, or you realize that the object's just kind of there and has not been owned by anyone, or you aren't able to actually connect it to who owns the title to it. For found in collection objects, the provenance of the object actually becomes separate from the object itself. So again, floating objects out there in the ether. It's usually identified through an inventory or a survey process, one of those topics that we all love to talk about, which is inventories of our collection storage. But oftentimes you'll go through it, you'll be reconciling your documentation, and you'll realize that you have no information on this object. So again, it happens. We've all seen it, we've all had it happen to us, but these things exist in most people's collections. Now, when it comes to reconciling these things, one thing you have to remember of what your ultimate goal is as we enter into what actually is the process on how to deal with these objects. Your ultimate goal in this is to gain legal title to the object so that you can either acquire it or dispose of the object using the results of what we're going to be talking about in a second, your assessment. That's your goal. Of course, with an object that's maybe been abandoned or an orphan loan type of situation, you would like to get the object back to the original owner. That would be a wonderful thing. But really, the goal in this is to gain legal title, because once you have that legal title to the object, you've acquired it and you in fact own it, you can actually deal with the object itself. So just keep that in the back of your head as we continue on. Okay, so first steps. Let's say you've come across either a found in collection object or an abandoned object in your collection. You've come across it. What are you going to do? You're going to go ahead and assess the ownership status of the object. You're going to look for any kind of relevant information you can find on the object. This can include information about the original donor, old numbering systems. Sometimes there'll be numbering systems that argue with each other. I know I have come across objects with multiple numbering systems. It happens. Any old paperwork that might mention the object, and you can kind of think outside the box on this. Of course, accession files are kind of a thing that you would love to find, or even an old accession ledger. That's what you want to find. But you can also look amongst exhibit catalogs or newspaper articles or anything you can think of that might actually have information on the object itself, especially if it's been included in exhibitions. And then the final thing you can kind of do to help assess ownership status is talk to people on your staff. It's great to interview staff members that have been around a while. You can go talk to volunteers or docents or even board members. Anyone that you can talk to that might give you some hints as to where this object came from, what's the history behind it, any of that information is fairly useful. And then after you kind of have gained, hopefully, some basic knowledge of where this object came from or even a little bit of the past history, you're going to kind of go through the steps of what you do when you normally acquire object in your collection. You're going to say, okay, is this object relevant to my museum's mission? What's this physical condition look like? Is it in good condition? Is it going to need a lot of conservation treatment? All that kind of information. Does it have value? Monetary, scientific, scholarly. Is it related to Native American cultures? This can be a big hint as to maybe who the original owner is or how you guys acquired it. And does it contain endangered or threatened species? Again, these are things that you might see in just your normal acquisition policy. But again, it kind of helps you decide, okay, I'm trying to figure out what to do with this object. These are either like identifiers or things that may give you a hint as to who the original owner is or what to do for your next step. So now you come across your decision time. And this is, again, ultimate goal. We're not talking right away, make this decision. Do we want to acquire the object, or do we want to maybe think about trying to get it out of our collection area or dispose of it? If you decide to acquire the object, you're probably going to process it through your institution's acquisition process, as outlined in your collections management policy. Easy peasy. If you want to dispose of the object, again, just process it through your disposal. That's what you'd kind of think. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and follow my proper disposal methodology outlined in my collection management policy. That's what your ultimate goal is. So this all sounds very easy, right? Do some digging in some files, find out who owned it, maybe contact them. You acquire, you dispose it. Done. Well, I wish it was that easy. When it comes to actually legally gaining title, and now I'm talking about objects that maybe you have some information on, there are currently 39 states in the United States that actually have laws on the books that actually deal with how to handle abandoned property or found in collection objects. There's actually two great sources for comprehensive lists of these laws. And again, these are laws on the books of your particular state that actually say, okay, if you're a public institution in my state, this is how I can handle with these kind of unclaimed property or unclaimed issues. AAM has a great resource. The link is sitting there on the page. And then another group, the Association of Registrars and Collection Specialists, also have a great resource. Again, the link is on the page. Both of these websites list by state who has a law, how does it apply, and what the statute number is. So it's a really nice little chart on both these cases to find it. Now here in Florida, we have a law, which is great. Unfortunately, our law really only deals with objects I would classify as abandoned property, not found in collection objects. So if you have an object that you literally have no information on, again, one of those floating objects in the ether, you're going to have to be a custodian of it for a while, unfortunately. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes about how you kind of handle those types of objects. But if you have an object that's basically abandoned property, so let's say you have a name or you have information on what to do with it, you can actually deal with it in our state. The full link to the statute can be found here, or you can just search for Florida Statute 265.565. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some key points on our statute, just because I think it's interesting to kind of read it and kind of say, okay, this is kind of what the law actually covers, but by no means is this the full law. So I would say definitely get that link, search through it the whole way to really understand how this law is going to work for you. Okay, so what does our statute say? Basically says that the legislator finds and declares that it is in the public interest to establish uniform procedures governing the disposition of unclaimed property on loan to museums in the state, and to encourage museums and their lenders to exercise due diligence in monitoring the loans, to allocate fairly responsibilities between lenders and borrowing museums, to establish procedures for lenders to preserve their interest in property loaned to the museum for indefinite or long-term loans, and to resolve, and this is the key point, expeditiously the title to unclaimed loans left in the custody of museums. So, in plain English, our state understood that this is a problem for Florida institutions. They gave us a way to create procedures to deal with this issue, to help both institutions and the original lenders. Again, some key points. When they talk about unclaimed property, which is interesting because when you read through the statutes, that's kind of where we're huddled, is unclaimed property. It means property which is on loan to the museum and in regard to which the lender or anyone acting legitimately on the lender's behalf has not contacted the museum for at least 25 years from the date of the beginning of the loan. If the loan was for an indefinite or undetermined period. So again, if you have one of these terms that I like to kind of makes me shudder when I think about it, but a long-term loan. So you have a begin date, but no end date. You can start from 25 years from that start date, counting, or for at least 5 years after the date upon which the loan for a definite period expired. So again, two options. If you didn't have an end date on your loan documentation, you start from the beginning. If you had an end date, you start from the end, you add 5 years. Concrete times, which is always a nice thing to see. So let's say you have one of these objects. Let's say you've gone through your inventory or your survey and you find one. When it actually comes to the termination of a loan, a museum may terminate a loan for unclaimed property in its possession by making a good faith and reasonable search for the identity and last known address of the lender from the museum records and other records reasonably available to the museum staff. So you've gone ahead and done your darndest to find any kind of documentation or contact information for your person that you loan from. Next, a museum shall provide notice of termination of a loan of unclaimed property by sending a letter of certified mail to the lender at the lender's last known address, giving notice of termination of the loan. So again, you've identified your object. What's your next step? And it hits that either 25-year mark or that 5-year mark. You're going to send a certified letter to go ahead and see if you can track them down, okay? Because again, this is you're doing your due diligence to try to find this person. If for some reason a museum is unable to identify sufficient information to send a notice, which can happen, or if a signed return receipt of a notice is sent by certified mail is not received by the museum within 30 days after the notice is mailed, the museum shall publish the notice of termination of loan containing all the information available to the museum provided in a paragraph at least twice, 60 days or more apart in a publication of general circulation in the county in which the museum is located and the county of the lender's last known address if known. Okay, so you've sent your letter, right? And let's say you don't get a return receipt from your letter, or let's say you don't have an address. You basically have to put a notice in the local paper. Now, I know newspapers are dying, and I know unfortunately they're on the way out, but as of right now, this is the best way to have a general notice to the area that you have this object and you're trying to deal with it. So again, and you're going to be doing it twice, 60 days or more apart, just to make sure you're covering all your bases with the actual circulation and who you might get in touch with. So let's say you've done that. You've gone ahead, you've done your newspaper notices, you sent your certified mail. For a museum to actually acquire a title, the property, basically, once you've sent out that notice, if the lender of the property does not contact the museum within 90 days after the date notice was received, or for a property for which notice is by publication, if the lender or anyone claiming a legal interest in the property does not contact museum within 90 days after the date of second publication. So if you've done your letter, you still got to wait within 90 days after the signed receipt. If you've done your 2 newspaper advertisements, each 60 days apart, you then need to wait another 90 days after that. And after that, you can actually legally claim title of those orphaned objects according to a state law. So those are your time, and that's your period. So has anyone used Florida, this statute? As far as I can tell, no. I have yet to actually track down anyone who's used it. I think we might have a few, and if you have done it, please let me know. Or if you think of some objects that maybe qualify under this law, let us know. And you can probably be the first one, and we'll definitely put you up as a case study to see how this law worked. I think it's important that if there is someone, we'd love to know just to keep track of it around the state. We don't have a good database of that, and I think that would be an interesting thing to track. So again, if you know of someone who has actually applied this law in Florida, please do let us know. Okay, so let's say you have dealt with your orphan collections and your abandoned. But now what do you do with all these other types of objects, these found in collection objects for some reason? Or maybe you have some of these abandoned objects you just can't gain title to and you don't have information and it's not good. For now, you will need to remain a custodian of the object. You can't just sit there and be like, oh, I'm not going to deal with those things. We're going to put them off to the side. You're still legally a custodian. You do need to keep track of it. If it is if it's an abandoned object or you have some information and it's part of your loan numbering in your accession register, for example, I would just keep it like that. Just put notes on it that you're trying to identify the person. But if it's a found in collection, you do have to lead to the question of how do you manage this type of collection in our object? Most institutions will decide to number the object and, as I said, treat as all other objects in their collection as stipulated in your collection management policy. And like I just said, if the object is an unclaimed loan, you should just number it using your accepted practice. So if you have loan numbering that you've already set up, just go ahead and do it like that. That's fine. But if it's a true found in collection object, so again, as to recall, a found in collection object is something you have no information on, right? So it's just like this floating object in the ether. You might want to go ahead and decide to do a unique numbering system on the object so you can easily recognize it. That's something that's really nice because it has some great benefits. You can easily identify the object in your accession register. If you have this unique number on it or unique numbering system, you'll always be like, oh, okay, cool. I know that's one of my found in collection objects. We don't have any provenance on it. And another nice thing about using these unique numbers in them is if the original accession number is discovered, you can then retire, I put in quote, the FIC number and not disturb the rest of your numbering system. Because something I hate to see in an accession register are gaps. So if you have like 2005.001, 2005.002, etc., you don't want to all of a sudden see hops where it says .001 and then it hops to .003. That's something you never want to see in your register. Just some quick examples of how you might do your FIC numbering, your found in collection numbering. And some of these are taken directly from that found in collections website I referenced to at the beginning of the webinar. I prefer actually this top one, which I don't think is on the actual website, but I do 000 lot numbers when I deal with this type of thing. So if I come across something, I know that We discovered it in 2003, our institution. We put a triple zeros after it, and then you just do your normal lot numbering. Then if you happen to retire that number, you can put a note in it in the actual accession, your register, saying we retired it, and then assign the object your new number. You'll also see oftentimes the first accession of the year. Sometimes it's the .001, or they'll do it as at a crazy large number that is impossible to reach in a given year, or they'll put letters or something in front of it. But again, I tend to like the .000 because when I see those, I know right away, yes, this is something that is odd or a found in collection object. So just some quick last thoughts. You really must gain legal title of the object before your object is truly acquired or disposed of by your institution. That's something, it's even with found in collection items, you own them, and you're I don't want to really say you own them, you're more of a custodian for them until you've really figured out the legal title. And by no means really should you think about disposing them. It really needs to be treated as part of your collection and given the same standard of care as you would to do any of the other objects in your collection. I would also say until full legal title is established, be wary of using the object for certain actions like maybe a creation of reproductions for sale or any money-making device like using images that might go against copyright. If you don't own legal title of the object, you probably don't own the copyright. So I tend to avoid using those objects when it comes to any kind of money-making venture. I will say that you could probably go ahead and put them on exhibit if you want. In fact, sometimes putting them on exhibit might help people recognize them, or you might get some information from your community on who the original owner is. But that's something to think about. I would be very wary about using it. And again, under no circumstances should the object be disposed of before legal title is gained. The ramifications you would have from that, like let's say you have this object and it's found in collection, and you're just like, it doesn't belong with us. It's horrible. It's falling apart. We're gonna chuck it out the bin. You just never know. It could be something. It could be something special. You could have the original owner or the legal folks show up, or their relatives show up, and they might say, "Hey, this was ours. This was important." And the bad press you can get from it is just no fun for anyone. So again, this is our contact information. That's my email address at the top. I'm Robin, our executive director, and Laura, the project associate. And I'm going to go ahead and say if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and I will read them aloud and answer them to the group. So I'm going to turn off my mic for just a minute and see if anyone has any questions and then hop back on. Okay, so the question is, what happens if the object is harmful to the rest of the collections? For example, a box of newspapers, no documentation from Cleveland, no fit in my collection, and a few are moldy. Well, that is a very good question. In that case, you need to isolate the collection. I kind of look at it in that case. I mean, again, anytime you come across a collection object that is harmful to other things, you've got to isolate. And I know it would be really nice in the grand scheme of the world for everyone to have separate isolation rooms that no one can access. And I know that's not really the chance. But in many cases, you can go ahead and at least separate them from the rest of them, mark where you've placed it, and put them either in a separate, again, acid-free box or appropriate information. But you're going to want to really get them away from everything else from now. But again, in all your documentation, track it. Show where you've put it. Let people know that this has been isolated, this is pulled away from everything else, just so it doesn't end up spreading to other things. That's going to be your best bet right now, unfortunately. Again, I get nervous for things that you just don't know. And if you don't know, then people will just, they might come looking for them someday. So I'd really be upset, or I get nervous with the idea of maybe just disposing them. So for now, I would say isolate, isolate, isolate. Okay, our next question. We have literally thousands of FIC objects in our collection. How do you gain legal title of those objects if there is no information about how the museum acquired them? Well, okay, your first step, and unfortunately I don't know what state you're in, I would go look into your state laws and just see if there's anything in your state laws that you can do with it. For some reason, you might be in one of those great states that have something to do with found in collection laws. Here in Florida, we don't. So we can't really move forward on those. But if you are in a state that has a found in collection law, I would say use it and start going down that path. If you are in a state like here in Florida, where we do not have a found and collection object, you unfortunately are just going to have to hold on to the objects for now, which is not a great answer. I would definitely say I would probably, if I was in charge of that collection and I would look at it, I would try to get a rough idea of what that collection is, put a basic accession documentation on it of just like, this is the object, this is what it is, and then it would kind of probably end up going on the back burner. Maybe bringing it up every once in a while to maybe staff or returning staff that come back to see if maybe you can track down of who it is. But until you truly gain title of it, you're unfortunately going to have to act a bit of as a custodian for the object itself. And if you're in a state without any of these laws, we didn't have this law in our state up until I think the early 2010s. So, I mean, it's not too late to go ahead and start talking to your state legislatures and saying, this is a huge problem in our collections. Is there any way you can help us pass these kind of laws in our states, to see if maybe you can get added to that? Okay, our next question. Do you have a bibliography or list of resources we could use to find out more information on found in collections or abandoned property? There are, I would say go to that found in collection website that was produced by AAM. They was by that session rather. They are a good source for information. AAM also has some other good sources on that you can use. For an actual state of laws, the charts that I had for the AAM site and the Association of Registrars and Collections website, they are good ones to use too, to go talk to. There's a good couple lists on there that you can find. Like I said, AAM would be the good source, and then ARCS itself would be a good source. And then, I think we've all experienced, I'm a trained registrar, the RCAM listserv is also a really good spot to go find out that information. Okay, I'm going to read the next question. It says, hi, Robin. We have a coronet that was an international loan. Ooh, international, which dates over 25 years. The lender is a company based in London, which we're not sure is still in operation. Would we have to take out an ad in British newspapers as well? Also, would British abandoned property law take precedent, or would we follow Florida law? That is a tough question. I would have to say, the lender is a company based out of London, which is not sure if it's still in operation. Okay, number one, I would sit there and try to do some research and find out, okay, are they in operation or not, or did they get swallowed up by someone else? When you start talking about international law, that's called talk to a lawyer. I don't know which would take precedence. I wouldn't, our law is a state law. I would guess the UK law, if it was a government law, it might take precedence. If nothing else, I think that's your first step. I think you would sit there and say, really try to do your research as much as you can with that London-based company to see if it was in operation or if it got swallowed up by a conglomerate. If you hit a dead end that way, then I would say right now, it would be really interesting to maybe talk to someone who deals with law of abandoned property or someone along that line, just because, again, you're going to be dealing with like sovereignty and some other issues which could get pretty sticky. So that would be kind of the first step I would do. Okay, and then we have another question. It says, how do you deal with objects when you can't discern whether they are FIC or found in collection or simply objects that were never meant to be in the collection? For example, old office equipment listed in an inventory. I've actually worked with a collection like this. Office equipment, if you can actually say, this is office equipment, it was purchased by the company you work for, if you can find a bill of sale or just anything that can actually make it seem that you guys purchased this, then you could theoretically go ahead and deaccession it from your collection. Again, if you can prove, you can sit there and be like, well, we bought a bunch of office furniture in 2005. This is objects that is obviously, it's a projector, you know what I mean? Like it needs to be moved. The other thing that oftentimes you'll see is sometimes, and I've dealt with this as well, let's say you're looking at a large, your collection, right? You can sit there and start classifying your collection underneath permanent collections, teaching collections, education collections. You could almost start taking the step of creating a separate collection, shifting all those old office equipment over into a separate collection, saying, this is office equipment. We're not going to be dealing with this the same as our permanent collection items, our true good objects or artifacts, and then you can start dealing with the objects under that case. And again, I've dealt with that. I've been at a place where they labeled folding chairs with accession numbers, and when I looked at that, I kind of said to myself, this is not a part of the permanent collection. So I felt like we were able to, because they were very obviously folding chairs purchased for the actual institution. We purchased them as the ownership. We are able to classify them as something slightly different, which means if we want to get rid of them, they're not part of our true permanent collection. We'll be able to process it under that. Now, if they seem more object or artifactual based, again, you're going to have to kind of treat them as underneath the terms of your collection management policy. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I want to say thank you to everyone for participating in today's webinar. As I said, this has been recorded, so we will be posting it to our Connecting to Collections, the FAM YouTube channel. And you will be receiving a survey in a few hours about the webinar to see if you're interested in more or if there was something not covered or any other questions you have. And as I said before, if you have any further questions for me or anyone else on the FAM C2C project team, feel free to email us. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon, and we will see you in about a month and a half.